Welcome to the deep dive. Ready to dive deep into something pretty fascinating?
I am.
Today it's all about oxygen.
Oh, oxygen.
Yeah, more than just, breathing.
Right.
You'll be surprised by how much there is to discover about this a seemingly simple element, and we've got just the source for it too.
Okay.
Excerpts from, you guessed it, Wikipedia's oxygen article.
Okay.
Now, I know what you're thinking, Wikipedia, not exactly, a page turner, right? But trust me, we're going to break it down, make it fun.
Okay.
And most importantly, super informative. So are you ready to completely rethink oxygen?
Absolutely.
All right, let's go way back in time. Billions of years ago to a time when Earth was, get this, pretty much oxygen free.
Wow. That's hard to imagine.
No oxygen to breathe. What would that even be like?
It would be a completely different world. The life that existed back then was adapted to that environment.
Right. So how did we go from zero oxygen to, the 21% we have in the atmosphere today? That's a huge jump.
Yeah. That's where things get interesting.
Okay.
It all started with, believe it or not, bacteria. Tiny little organisms called cyanobacteria.
Cyanobacteria.
They were the first ones to figure out this whole photosynthesis thing.
Oh, right. Photosynthesis, where plants use sunlight to create energy and release oxygen as a byproduct.
Exactly. And that was a game changer. I mean, imagine these little bacteria pumping out oxygen, completely transforming the planet's atmosphere.
Talk about a makeover. But wait, all this extra oxygen, wasn't that bad for some life forms?
You're right, it was. For those organisms that thrived in that oxygen-free world, the rise of oxygen was a disaster. A lot of them just couldn't adapt and died off.
Wow. So the rise of oxygen was like a mass extinction event.
It was a major turning point.
It's kind of mind-blowing to think about it that way. Oxygen, the thing we need to live, was actually toxic for a lot of early life. Talk about irony.
Yeah, it just goes to show how much of an impact oxygen had.
Right. But this shift also paved the way for the evolution of more complex life, like us. Life that could use oxygen for energy.
It's all connected.
So we owe a lot to those little cyanobacteria.
We do.
But it wasn't just life on Earth that changed, right? Oxygen started reacting with the Earth's crust too, forming all those oxides.
Right, shaping the very landscape of the planet.
Wow. Okay, so fast forward to today, and oxygen is everywhere. It's the third most abundant element in the entire universe.
It's incredible.
And here on Earth, it's found in so many forms.
It is. I mean, think about the Earth's crust. Almost half of it is made up of oxygen.
Mostly in oxides.
Yeah, it's everywhere we look.
So when I pick up a rock, I'm holding a piece of oxygen history.
Exactly.
That's so cool.
And that's just the crust. Think about the oceans.
Okay.
88.8% oxygen by mass.
Wait, the oceans. But isn't water H2O? 2 hydrogens, 1 oxygen.
It is.
Okay.
But the oxygen atom is much heavier than the hydrogen atoms.
Yeah.
So most of the ocean's mass actually comes from all those oxygen atoms in water.
Wow. Okay, my mind is officially blown.
And then there's the air we breathe. Don't forget about that.
Yeah, about 21% oxygen. We're literally swimming in it.
We are. It's all around us.
So we've got oxygen in the crust, the oceans, the air, shaping our planet and making life possible. It's clearly a busy element. But what about how it moves through our world?
Yeah.
There's this thing called the oxygen cycle, right?
There is. It's how oxygen is constantly being used and replenished.
It's like a giant planet-sized recycling system.
It is. And the key to it all, photosynthesis.
The oxygen factories.
Exactly.
Plants and algae using sunlight to create food and release oxygen. It's like this beautiful natural loop.
It is. A perfect balance, almost.
Almost.
Well, we use oxygen too,
Right. We breathe it in. Our bodies use it for energy.
That's respiration. And it uses up oxygen.
And then there's decomposition where microorganisms break down dead stuff, also using oxygen.
Right. And let's not forget combustion, burning things.
Oh, right. Like burning fossil fuels.
Exactly. All these processes consume oxygen.
So we've got these different forces pushing and pulling on this oxygen supply.
We do. And for now, it's roughly in balance. But that's not something we can take for granted.
Okay, that sounds a little ominous. We'll definitely have to come back to that later. But for now, let's move beyond breathing. Oxygen is clearly essential for life, but what else is this amazing element up to?
Oh, so much more.
Okay, give me some examples.
Okay, well, think about industry. Did you know that 55% of the oxygen we produce commercially goes into making steel?
Steel. Seriously. Like the stuff they use to build skyscrapers and bridges?
The very same. Oxygen is essential for that process.
So it's not just the building blocks of life, it's the building blocks of our cities, too.
It is. And then there's the chemical industry. They use another 25% of commercially produced oxygen to make all sorts of everyday products.
Like what?
Plastics,
Okay.
fabrics,
Antifreeze.
antifreeze. I had no idea.
Oxygen is everywhere. It truly is, even when we don't realize it. Okay, so we've got steel, chemicals. What else?
Medicine, welding, even rocket fuel.
Rocket fuel. No way. The stuff that launches us into space.
Yep, oxygen is a key ingredient. But here's where things get really interesting. Did you know that oxygen can actually exist in different forms?
Different forms. Like, what do you mean? Is an oxygen just, oxygen?
Well, we call these different forms allotropes. Think of it like this.
Okay.
Oxygen is like an actor who can play different roles depending on the costume they wear.
Okay, I like that analogy.
So each allotrope is like a different costume for oxygen, giving it different properties and behaviors.
So what are these different costumes for oxygen?
Well, the oxygen we breathe is called dioxygen, or O2. It's two oxygen atoms bonded together.
Two oxygen atoms holding hands, making the air we breathe. But you said there are other forms.
There's ozone, or O3.
Ozone, I know that one. It's what protects us from the sun's harmful UV rays.
Exactly. Up in the stratosphere, the ozone layer is essential for life.
It's like our planet's sunscreen. But wait, I thought ozone was also a bad thing.
It can be.
What? How can something that protects us also be harmful?
It depends on where it is.
Okay.
Ozone high up is good, but ozone near the ground is a pollutant.
Oh, right. It's formed by reactions with stuff from cars and factories.
Exactly.
So ozone can be both hero and villain.
It can. And speaking of different sides of oxygen, have you ever heard of liquid oxygen?
Liquid oxygen. Is that even a real thing?
Oh, it's real. And it's pretty amazing. It's this pale blue liquid.
Blue.
Wow.
Really? How do they even make that?
They cool oxygen gas down to extremely low temperatures. We're talking about minus 183 degrees Celsius.
That is seriously cold, and they just keep it in like a thermos or something.
Well, not quite. It has to be stored in these special insulated containers to keep it that cold.
Right. And I bet you wouldn't want to spill that stuff. Sounds pretty reactive.
You definitely wouldn't. It's incredibly reactive.
Yeah. So it's cold, it's blue, it's potentially explosive. I'm officially intrigued. But what do they actually use liquid oxygen for?
Well, for one thing, it's a key component of rocket fuel.
Rocket fuel. So the same element that we breathe is helping power those incredible journeys into space. That's amazing.
It is. And it has other uses, too.
Like what?
Here on Earth, it's used in welding, cutting metals, even in hospitals,
Yeah.
to provide supplemental oxygen to patients.
So it's not just about rockets and industry, it's literally saving lives.
Exactly. Oxygen really is a multitasker.
Okay, I'm sold. Liquid oxygen is officially cool.
It is. But before we get too excited about all the amazing things oxygen can do, I think we need to talk about a growing concern about our oxygen supply.
Uh-oh. You're talking about that whole balance thing again, right? That it's getting disrupted.
I am. Scientists have actually observed a slight downward trend in global oxygen levels over the past few decades.
Wait, so the amount of oxygen in the atmosphere is actually decreasing? Why is that happening?
Well, there are a few reasons. Burning fossil fuels is a big one.
Okay.
When we burn fossil fuels, we're combining carbon with oxygen, kicking it out of the atmosphere.
Right, and releasing carbon dioxide. So it's like we're using up oxygen faster than it can be replenished.
And deforestation is another factor. Remember those oxygen factories?
Two plants?
Yeah. When we cut down forests, we're reducing the planet's ability to produce oxygen.
That's not good. It's kind of scary to think that even something as abundant as oxygen could become a problem. What happens if oxygen levels keep going down?
Well, it's something we need to pay attention to for sure. Even small changes in oxygen levels can impact ecosystems and human health.
Right. It's a reminder that we need to think about our impact on the planet and find ways to live more sustainably. I mean, we need oxygen.
We do.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, from the early Earth to liquid oxygen, from steel mills to rocket fuel, but I feel like we're just scratching the surface.
We are. There's so much more to explore.
Okay, I'm ready. Let's keep diving.
Let's do it. So before the break, we were talking about how scientists use oxygen isotopes to understand past climates.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing how these tiny atoms hold clues to, like, the vast history of our planet.
It's true. It's like oxygen has its own secret language.
Right. But, okay, before we get too lost in the, ancient past, let's zoom in on something a little more familiar. The oxygen we breathe right now, O2.
The oxygen molecule. Two oxygen atoms linked together in a covalent double bond.
Okay, covalent double bond. You're going to have to break that down for me. What does that even mean?
Okay, so think of it like this. Those two oxygen atoms are sharing, not one, but two pairs of electrons. That's what makes their bond so strong.
So they're like really good friends holding on tight. But I remember from chemistry class that oxygen is also really reactive.
That's right. Oxygen loves to bond with other elements. And that's why it's so important for processes like combustion.
Combustion, that's just a fancy word for burning, right?
Exactly. And oxygen is essential for burning because it acts as an oxidizing agent. It helps other substances burn by reacting with them.
So it's not the fuel itself, but it's like the key that unlocks the fuel's energy.
That's a great way to put it. It's like oxygen is saying, hey, let's get this party started.
Okay, that explains why we need oxygen to breathe. It helps our bodies unlock the energy in food through cellular respiration, right?
Exactly. Oxygen helps us turn the food we eat into the energy we need to live.
Okay, so oxygen is reactive. It helps things burn. It powers our cells. It sounds pretty intense. But then why doesn't everything just like spontaneously combust all the time? With all this oxygen around, shouldn't we be living in a world of constant explosions?
That's a great question. And the answer lies in the way the electrons are arranged in the oxygen molecule. You see, the oxygen we breathe exists in what we call a triplet state.
Triplet state. Okay, that sounds kind of complicated.
It's all about the spin of those electrons we were talking about. In a triplet state, oxygen is actually a bit slow to react with most organic molecules.
So it's like oxygen is taking it easy, not going full speed ahead. That's a good thing, right? It means we're less likely to burst into flames.
Exactly. This triplet state is like a built-in safety mechanism. It prevents spontaneous combustion and keeps us safe.
Well, thank goodness for that. But you mentioned there's another form of oxygen where the electrons are all paired up, singlet oxygen, right?
That's right. Singlet oxygen is much more reactive than triplet oxygen. It's like oxygen with its energy drink on, ready to go.
So that sounds potentially dangerous. Where does this singlet oxygen even come from?
Singlet oxygen is actually produced naturally in small amounts, for example, during photosynthesis. Plants actually use it to protect themselves from pests and pathogens.
Wow, so even oxygen has a dark side. Plants are using this super reactive form of oxygen to fight off enemies. That's incredible.
It is. It's a reminder that even something as essential as oxygen can have multiple roles and even some, unexpected uses.
Okay, so we've got dioxygen, the stable oxygen we breathe, ozone up high and down low, and even the super reactive singlet oxygen. But I still can't get over this idea of liquid oxygen. It just boggles my mind that something we breathe can be turned into a liquid.
It is pretty wild to think about, and it takes some serious engineering to produce and store it.
Yeah, we talked about those special insulated containers, but what is liquid oxygen actually used for? Aside from looking super cool in sci-fi movies, of course.
Well, remember how reactive oxygen is?
Mm-hmm.
That makes liquid oxygen incredibly useful as an oxidizer.
An oxidizer, like
Right.
to help things burn even better.
Exactly. Liquid oxygen is a key component of rocket fuel. It helps those massive rockets blast off into space.
Wow, so the same element that helps us breathe is also powering those incredible journeys to the stars. That's pretty amazing. What else is liquid oxygen used for?
Well, here on Earth, liquid oxygen has a variety of industrial uses, like welding and cutting metals.
So it's cutting-edge technology and everyday tools. Oxygen really is a multitasker.
It really is. And there's even more. Liquid oxygen is used in hospitals to provide supplemental oxygen to patients who need it.
So it's not just about rockets and industry, it's literally saving lives. Okay, I think I'm convinced liquid oxygen is pretty awesome.
It is pretty remarkable. But before we get too carried away with all the amazing things oxygen can do, I think it's important to address a growing concern about our oxygen supply.
Oh, you're talking about that ominous warning you gave earlier, right? Something about the balance of oxygen being disrupted.
Yes, unfortunately, scientists have observed a slight downward trend in global oxygen levels over the past few decades.
Wait, so the amount of oxygen in the atmosphere is actually decreasing? That's a little scary. What's causing that? Is it all the fossil fuels we're burning?
That's a big part of it. When we burn fossil fuels, we're combining carbon with oxygen, removing it from the atmosphere, and releasing carbon dioxide.
So it's like we're using up oxygen faster than it can be replenished.
And deforestation is another factor. Trees are like giant oxygen factories, so when we cut down forests, we're reducing the planet's ability to produce oxygen.
That's a sobering thought. It makes you realize that even something as seemingly abundant as oxygen isn't infinite. What are the implications of this downward trend? Should we be worried?
Well, it's definitely something we need to pay attention to. The decline in oxygen levels is relatively small so far, but it could have significant consequences in the long run.
Like what kind of consequences? Will we eventually run out of breathable air?
It's not quite that dramatic, but even small changes in oxygen levels can impact ecosystems and human health. It's a reminder that we need to be mindful of our impact on the planet and find ways to live more sustainably.
So what can we do? How do we ensure a sustainable oxygen supply for the future?
That's a complete question with no easy answers. But it starts with understanding the problem and working together to find solutions. Reducing our reliance on fossil fuels, protecting our forests, and developing new technologies for carbon capture and oxygen production are all part of the equation.
It's like we need to become better stewards of this precious element.
Exactly. Oxygen is a gift from our planet, and it's up to us to protect it.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about the different forms of oxygen, its amazing uses, and even the challenges we face in maintaining a healthy oxygen supply. But I feel like there's still so much more to discover.
There is. We haven't even talked about all the amazing compounds that oxygen forms, from water to rocks to the very building blocks of life.
I'm ready for more. This deep dive has already been a whirlwind, and I can't wait to see where it takes us next.
Welcome back to our Oxygen Odyssey. We've journeyed from the early Earth to the depths of space, exploring the many faces of this incredible element.
And it's amazing how something so fundamental to our existence can be so full of surprises.
Absolutely. But before we wrap up our deep dive, there's one more area I'm really curious about: the compounds that oxygen forms.
Oh, yeah.
We've touched on a few, like oxides in the Earth's crust. But oxygen is so reactive, I bet it must combine with, like, practically everything, right? You're absolutely right. Oxygen is like the social butterfly of the periodic table. It forms compounds with almost every other element.
Wow.
And these compounds are all around us. Some are even essential for life as we know it.
Okay, I'm ready for a chemistry lesson. Hit me with some examples.
Okay, let's start with the most obvious and perhaps the most important: water.
Water. Seriously. I mean, yeah, of course, I know water is H2O, 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen atom, but I never really thought of it as an oxygen compound.
But it is.
Okay.
And it's a perfect example of how oxygen's ability to bond with other elements creates something entirely new, with unique properties.
Yeah, I guess it's easy to take water for granted. We drink it, we wash with it, it's all around us. But you're right, those 2 little hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen atom come together to create something truly remarkable.
Think about it.
Yeah.
Water has a high boiling point, which means it stays liquid over a wide range of temperatures.
Right.
Crucial for life. It's also a fantastic solvent, able to dissolve many other substances.
So water is basically oxygen's superpower. It's like the ultimate multi-tool.
You could say that, and those superpowers come from oxygen's electronegativity, its tendency to attract electrons.
Electronegativity. Okay, that sounds a bit like a chemistry exam question.
Don't worry, it's not that complicated.
Cool.
Basically, oxygen's strong pull on electrons creates a polar molecule in water, meaning it has a slightly positive end and a slightly negative end. And this allows water molecules to interact with all sorts of other molecules, dissolving them and carrying them around.
So water's polarity is what makes it such a good solvent. It's like it can make friends with everyone.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay.
And this ability to dissolve and transport substances is essential for life. It's how nutrients get delivered to our cells and waste products are removed.
Okay, water, check. What other amazing compounds does oxygen create?
Well, remember we were talking about oxides in the Earth's crust?
Yeah.
Those are compounds where oxygen is bound to another element, like metals.
Right, like iron oxide, which is rust. Not exactly the most glamorous compound.
But it's everywhere. And there are so many others. Silicon dioxide, which makes up sand and quartz.
Wow.
Aluminum oxide, found in rubies and sapphires. These oxides make up the very foundation of our planet.
So every time I walk on the beach or admire a sparkling gemstone, I'm witnessing the power of oxygen's bonding abilities.
Exactly. And those are just the simple oxides.
Wow.
Oxygen also forms more complex compounds, like silicates, which are the most abundant minerals on Earth. They form the bedrock of our continents.
It's incredible to think that oxygen is woven into the very fabric of our planet. But what about life? Does oxygen form compounds in living organisms too?
Absolutely.
Right.
Oxygen is a key component of organic compounds, the molecules that make up all living things.
Okay, time for a quick biology recap. We've got carbohydrates, fats, proteins, and DNA, the building blocks of life, and oxygen is part of all of them.
It's essential. Carbohydrates, our primary source of energy, are made up of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Fats, which store energy, also contain those 3 elements. Proteins, The workhorses of our cells are chains of amino acids, and many of those amino acids contain oxygen. And DNA, the molecule that carries our genetic information, also includes oxygen in its structure.
Wow, it's like oxygen is the glue that holds life together. It's involved in energy production, energy storage, building our bodies, and even passing on our genetic traits.
And we haven't even touched on all the industrial uses of oxygen compounds. For example, ethylene oxide, the compound formed by reacting ethylene with oxygen, is used to make antifreeze, plastics, and fabrics.
So oxygen compounds are keeping our cars running, our clothes soft, and our world turning. It's truly remarkable.
And that's the beauty of oxygen, isn't it? It's this simple element, just two letters on the periodic table, but its influence is felt everywhere. From the air we breathe to the rocks beneath our feet, from the processes that power our cells to the technologies that shape our world, oxygen connects us all.
This deep dive has been a real eye-opener. I've learned so much about this incredible element, and I don't think I'll ever look at the world the same way again.
And that's the power of curiosity, isn't it? It leads us to new discoveries and helps us appreciate the wonders of the universe, even in the most familiar things.
You're right. It's like oxygen itself, something we take for granted until we really stop and think about all the amazing things it does.
Exactly. And as we've seen, there's still so much more to learn about oxygen. Scientists are constantly making new discoveries, uncovering its secrets and exploring its potential.
Well, I, for one, am definitely going to be paying more attention to oxygen from now on. It's not just an element, it's a story of life, energy, transformation, and connection.
And that story is still being written. Who knows what amazing discoveries about oxygen lie ahead?
That's a great point. And it leads us to our final thought-provoking question for you, dear listener. Given oxygen's vital role in life and industry, what innovations might be necessary to ensure a sustainable oxygen supply for the future?
It's a challenge that calls for creativity, ingenuity, and a deep understanding of this essential element.
So keep breathing, keep exploring, and keep asking questions. Who knows, maybe you'll be the one to unlock the next chapter in oxygen's amazing story.
Until next time, thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.